Hi guys, we are in the middle of discussing the Arthashastra, and today we get into a small gist presented by the translator on the topics of trade, labor and employment, and human and animal welfare. Although there is a separate subchapter on animal welfare altogether, we'll get into that maybe a few days later. So trade. The Arthashastra treats in detail every aspect of trade, the third pillar of economic activity. Apart from promoting trade by improving the infrastructure, the state was required to keep trade routes free of harassment by courtiers, state officials, thieves, and frontier guards. There's a quote by Chanakya, which was popularized by Sanjeev Sanyal, that just as a fish, you never know when a fish drinks water, you'll never know when a government official steals public money. So that was Chanakya's views on bureaucrats. Traders were mistrusted. To quote Chanakya himself, merchants are all thieves, in effect, if not in name. They shall be prevented from oppressing the people. So he sounds to be pretty Marxist here, but although he is very nuanced because he hates bureaucrats as well. He pretty much hates everyone on the earth. Their propensity to fix prices, the traders, their propensity to fix prices by forming cartels, make excessive profits, or deal in stolen property was guarded against by making these offences punishable by heavy fines. The duties of the chief controller of private tradings are listed in chapter 7. We'll get to that later. Control over prices and trade practices was made easier by prohibiting sale of agricultural products or minerals at their places of production. Selling at places other than the designated markets was also punishable. In addition to his supervisory duties, the chief controller could also grant the appropriate exemptions if a merchant's goods were damaged due to unforeseen reasons. Weights and measures used by merchants were periodically inspected. Use of unstamped measures was a punishable offense. The specifications for making standard weights and measures and their sale prices are laid down in a later appendix. An interesting aspect was the use of 4 different sets of weights and measures. The biggest for payments into the treasury, the second biggest the standard trade measure, the third for payments out of the treasury, and the smallest for palace expenditure. By using these, the transaction tax, vyaji, probably from which the word vyaj has come about, which means interest. By using these, the transaction tax, vyaji, was automatically collected. This is fully explained under vyaji in chapter 5.2. The interests of the consumer were protected by prescribing even the extra amounts to be given when selling liquids like ghee, either because the liquid had expanded by heating it for ease of pouring or because some of it would have stuck to the measure. So he is basically making sure spillage that is considered in every business, so that the spillage does not affect the customer, even though right now the spillage actually affects the customer, not the producer. The law on dealings between private merchants includes selling on an agency basis, revocation of contracts between traders, and traders traveling together pooling their goods. The expression foreign merchants in the context has to be understood as meaning traders from outside the state. There are many references to countries and regions within the Indian subcontinent. The truly foreign countries mentioned are Ceylon, Barbara, Arachosia as the sources of pearls, Burma or Sumatra for aloe, Nepal for woolen cloth, Gandhara, Vanayu in Arabia or Persia, and Balika, which is the Bactrian region in Afghanistan, for furs and horses. Kapisa in Afghanistan and Harahura in Scythia for wine. The importance of foreign trade is indicated by the advice given to the conqueror that he should pause after declaring war if he could divert to his own country the valuable goods going to the enemy by a trade route. Import and sale of foreign goods was encouraged in order to make them freely available all over the country. To promote imports, tax exemptions were given to importers, foreign merchants were given limited immunity from being sued, and a higher profit margin allowed for imported goods compared to local products. The official in charge of exports, the chief controller of state trading, was advised to undertake foreign trade only if there was a profit, except when there were political or strategic advantages in trading with a particular country. So he's saying that what essentially we follow even today. If a trade is loss making, even then it needs to be done if that is a great strategic partnership with a stupid country. Kautilya's advice on calculating the costs of an export transaction is clear and accurate. Export of weapons and valuable material was prohibited. All that has to remain inside the country. Duty was levied and collected at the city gates where goods were sold by the trader calling out a price. If the actual sale price was higher due to competitive bidding by the buyers, the state took the difference. For import duties and goods exempt from duty, see Appendix 9, we'll get to those later. Now, labor and employment. Apart from the aged, the sick and the handicapped, who are all mentioned as requiring the protection of the state, the actual labor force excluded some who voluntarily withdrew from it. Ascetics such as monks and nuns, hermits or vanaprasthas, Brahmins in their ashrams, and mendicants. Women's employment has been dealt with earlier in this chapter. The references to child labor are using them to collect ingredients for the liquor industry, the bonding or slavery of non-Arya children, and the priority release for a minor of an Arya who had pledged himself and his family. The total labor force can be classified in increasing degree of freedom as follows: slaves, bonded labor, unpaid labor, casual labor working for wages, piece rate workers, those working for a regular wage, and the self-employed. Now, the problem with slavery is that slavery was indeed actually banned by Chandragupta Maurya by some decrees. The only reason he keeps slaying is because when this translation was written, there was no awareness of the actual translation of the word slave. We tended to use the word slave for anywhere that was mentioned the word dasa. But dasa does not mean slavery as we understand in the African and American context. For that, you need to read books by Professor Bharat Gupta. The verses relating to slaves and bonded labor are in chapter 7. Unpaid laborers are those who worked in lieu of paying a tax or a fine. See, if there was slavery, no one would be paid. But here it's being said that there were specifically unpaid laborers because those people were paying off some fine or a tax which they could not afford to pay with their money. So instead they were working for paying off that fine. They could work in warehousing, processing grains, oil seeds or sugarcane in crown lands, in mines when caught stealing or mining without permission, and women in spinning yarn. These are the people who would be unpaid laborers, who are basically who could not pay taxes or pay a fine. Piece rate, Piece. Piece rate is mentioned in connection with the Chief of Ordnance awarding work to expert craftsmen, and the assessment of customs duty on jewelry. The self-employed, such as weavers, washermen, dyers, tailors, goldsmiths, silversmiths, and blacksmiths, were paid according to the work done by them. The wages of agricultural labor have been referred to above under agriculture. Those who looked after crown herds were paid wholly in cash because if paid in milk and ghee, they might be tempted to starve the calves to get a higher yield. The law on wages and contract employment is in chapter 7. In some cases, wages were related to productivity, for example, workers in state retail outlets. The relationship between wages, productivity, and incentives for increasing production is seen clearly in the spinning sector of the textile industry. Now see how free market Chanakya sounds. A large part of those working for a regular wage or salary were employed by the state, particularly in the civil service, the secret service, and the army. The salaries and wages of all state employees is given in chapter 5. It is interesting to note that Kautilya fixes the ceiling on expenditure on salaries of state servants at 1/4 of the revenue. It is also likely that some employees and craftsmen in a village were paid either a regular wage out of the village revenue or given a share of the village produce. Self-employed craftsmen formed guilds or sreni, which guaranteed the conduct of its members. The guild was responsible for the return of any material entrusted to a member. Now, human and animal welfare. Just as Kautilya's important classifications to his advocacy of unethical methods is often ignored, so is the voluminous evidence in the Arthashastra of his emphasis on welfare, not only of human beings but also of animals. But remember, I was going to say this only, that welfare in the Arthashastra is not just an abstract concept, and neither does it mean like a welfare nanny state as understood by socialists. Welfare means doing good for someone, not stealing other people's money and handing out to other people. It covers maintenance of social order, increasing economic activity, protection of livelihood, protection of the weaker section of the population, prevention of harassment of the subjects, consumer protection, and even welfare of slaves and prisoners. Dasas and prisoners, not fucking slaves being tied to chains. The fact that one of the concerns of the state was the welfare of the subjects should not lead us to confuse it with the concept of a welfare state, as we know it today. The two glaring omissions in the Kautilyan concept of welfare are education and health, the promotion of which is now considered to be a state's major duty. Though the duties and responsibilities of 36 different heads of departments are spelt out, there are no posts of chief superintendents of education or health. Education is referred to only in the context of the training of a prince to be a king. Public health is touched upon with reference to public hygiene. The human resource aspect of society was a matter of private, not state concern.